Hello and welcome to Technically Speaking, where scientists and engineers come together to chat about a common interest, share knowledge and satisfy some curiosity. I'm Laura and I'm joined by Ellie to talk about the recent news of babies being born via in-vitro fertilisation who have 3 parents, and it's a way of circumventing a fairly challenging genetic disease. So Ellie, you work in science journalism. Why is this in the news right now?
Well, to be honest, I'm not sure, because this isn't as new as The Guardian is making it out to be. They've done this since 2003, I think. The first baby was born that had this procedure with 3... They're calling it 3 parents. I don't know if that's even technically the right term. 3 contributing factors, maybe we should call it that. But this recent research is 8 babies now have been born alive and well with no sign of this sort of genetic condition. So maybe it's just a good news story that's being shared around.
I guess so. I mean, they've proved it can be done multiple times, which is what you want in science, repetition.
Yeah, so true.
But I also wonder if maybe there was a press officer somewhere that just got proactive with sharing the news. So was that just out there sending it to loads of different news outlets who thought, yeah, why not? It's a good, as you say, it's a good news story.
Yeah, I mean, being on, I write a lot of animal stories for work, and I'm on, lists for, flora and fauna, can never say that, and, Chester Zoo, and, Panthera, and, animal organisations that know that I'm looking for nice animal stories or interesting animal research or new studies. So, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if there's someone... I'm not sure if this is associated with a particular university or anything, that's emailing The Guardian or a really high profile press officer that's got ins with different news outlets. There's also the thing, and this may be my cynicism speaking, that anything to do with IVF, with sort of genetic manipulation, is going to get clicks. It's always just on a little bit of that side of controversial that people will have opinions about it, will want to read about it, will be perhaps not on the science side of it as much as you or I would be.
Yeah, I find it a little bit odd that it's still seen by some as unethical, given that it's been around for decades now. And I can see why it was controversial when it was being developed back in the 50s and 60s and 70s. But now I think times have changed, science has come forward. And the headlines I saw when you mentioned they seemed a little bit clickbaity, they did seem to suggest that there were 8 babies from 3 people, as if one woman was carrying all of these 8 babies inside of her at once. It does sound a bit racy, but I don't think that's what they actually mean, is it, from what you were saying?
No, this is what I mean about sort of clickbaity headlines and perhaps people not fully grasping what's been going on. This is not one woman. This is, as I understand it, 7 different women, because one person had twins. But what they do is pretty cool. So it's a special type of IVF. Normally in IVF, you take sperm and you take an egg, you fertilise them outside of the womb, and then you transplant them back into a uterus.
Mm-hmm.
However, with this, you take the sperm and then you take genetic material from the nucleus of an egg, and then you put it into a second egg that's had the nucleus removed. So then you get the 3. So you get...
Yeah.
The reason that they want to do that is because of mitochondrial disease, which is passed always through a female line. And if you have genetic markers, or if you have the disease yourself and you don't want to pass it on to your offspring, then you need an egg cell without any mitochondria in, or with healthy mitochondria in, rather, to make this happen.
And this is because the mitochondria aren't in the nucleus of the egg cell, which is where the mother's main genetic material, the stuff that dictates what you look like and what other diseases you might have.
Yeah, so it's not really 3 parents, and it's basically instead of a sperm donor, it's an empty egg donor. Vessel, yeah. It's just a healthy egg with some healthy mitochondria. But there is such a thing as mitochondrial DNA, which would be unique to that person. So that's where they're getting the 3 DNA strands from. So you've got dad's DNA in the sperm, mum's DNA in the nucleus, and then this mitochondrial DNA that will come from the third person.
And your mitochondria, I remember from school, they're the powerhouse of the cells.
The powerhouse of the cell. I don't think anything has been driven into the mindset of millennials more than that.
So that's basically what's responsible for helping produce energy so that your body can function, right? It's the whole
ATP cycle.
ATP, yeah.
Oh God, going back to those days. That was a time. But yes, essentially it makes ATP, which is basically energy for cells to do whatever they need to do.
Lovely adenosine triphosphate. What I found a bit This seems really obvious, but depending on how you phrase it, it seems a bit weird that the cytoplasm is the equivalent of the yolk in a bird's egg.
Oh, is that true? That's fun. I never thought of it like that. I guess it's a bit different to... Is it a bit different to a bird? Because like mammalian, embryonic development, you end up with a placenta and then you get nutrients fed into that. Whereas a bird has like a weird egg yolk thing.
Yeah, all the nutrients are already in there. So there must be some differences, but then I guess that evolutionary divergence means there must be some similarities as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's all like pretty similar, just add a few extra calcium carbonate shells in there.
And I got the impression that this placenta doesn't form straight away, so there has a period where the fertilised egg has to survive in the womb on its own. So the cytoplasm produces or provides nutrients and energy in those early stages, which might explain some of the similarity between us and birds.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. Because at the start, it's just cell division, right, for ages. You go from one fertilised egg and then it splits and then it splits and then it splits. So it doesn't have anything to provide nutrients to it initially. Yeah, so maybe you're right. Maybe it is all in the cytoplasm when it's like a, 16-stage cell.
And that makes me think that what's going on to actually have a successful pregnancy and a healthy baby must be really complicated, all the different biochemistry that's happening. Your description at the start sounded reasonably simple, albeit slightly complicated by having 3 donors involved.
Yeah. I think writing it down or saying it out loud, it is relatively simple, but getting to that point is relatively difficult, I think.
Yeah, and it sounds like success rates are still fairly low for IVF as a whole, not this very specific 3-body contribution.
Yes. I'm not sure what they're at now. I think initially they were very low, but nowadays, I guess it really depends on why you're choosing to go to IVF in the first place. Like what sort of fertility issues you might be dealing with.
This is what I started to wonder, because one thing that's important for in vitro fertilisation is before they put it back in the body, they have a growth medium. That sounds like there was a lot of development involved for that. So it's not just as simple as taking some chemicals and sticking them together. You need the right chemicals put together in the right way to make the biochemistry happen.
Is this growth medium is for you've taken the egg and the sperm and mixed it together and then it's growing before it goes back into the person?
Yes.
Right.
So essentially giving it a bit more of a boost than just having the egg with the cytoplasm that provides the nutrients. There must be some exchange between the cytoplasm and the surrounding environment, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it is quite complicated what's happening in that early stage, I guess. Because a lot of times as well, they test, what do they call them? Embryos, I guess, before they get implanted back in. And sometimes there can be like genetic issues or the embryo doesn't develop well or whatever. So then you potentially wouldn't then transfer that embryo back into the person you want it to be pregnant.
There must be a lot of challenges because IVF research, it's really started in earnest in the 1960s, as the Netflix film has told us. So there must be a lot more to it if success rates are... I think I read somewhere that for IVF as a whole, it's between 30 and 50% for women that are under 35, which, as a scientist wanting to reproduce something, they're not great reproducibility stats. In terms of reproducing data, I should say, not human reproduction.
Honestly, I thought it would be higher. But then I guess people do rounds as well, don't they? You can have multiple embryo transfers and stuff like that if it doesn't necessarily work the first time. Because it's what you see in movies. I mean, not necessarily in Joy, though that was a very good film on Netflix about the, like, fundamental start of IVF. But, like, people taking hormone injections for a long time in films and stuff like that to, like, prepare themselves for having an embryo transfer.
I also got the impression that there are different ways of doing the 3-body reproduction methods.
The 3-body problem.
Yeah. I'm trying not to call it 3-parent, and 3-body is the immediate thing that pops into my head.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? It's all these... You sort of trip over yourself a lot as well, because I'm also trying to be conscious and not always say woman either, which is like a whole other separate issue.
Because you can be born with male reproductive systems and whatever else, but then still be woman, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it is challenging. But I'd read there was a couple a long time ago that rather than doing the technique you suggested, where they take 2 eggs from women and mess with them a little bit and fertilise one of them, they fertilise both of them with the same father's sperm before replacing the nucleus.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and because there were 2 fertilised eggs, the couple thought that this was unethical because that was a chance for 2 children, not just 1.
Oh, yeah, this is, I mean, the ethics of this then get very complicated because what happens if you do IVF and you fertilise multiple embryos, which is what people usually do, and you end up with, I don't know, 8 healthy embryos, most people don't want 8 children. So then, say you have 2 children or 3 children out of those 8, what do you do with the remaining 5?
But then some of what they do for IVF as a whole, again, not necessarily the 3-body reproduction, was they'll do genetic testing to select the ones that are most likely to survive. So the ones that are least likely to get, halfway through the pregnancy and then just stop growing.
Yeah.
So in that respect, it's kind of maximising the chances of getting the outcome you wanted, which is a healthy child. Which, as a scientist, to me, that seems straightforward. But then I'm not the one looking to have a child through this technique.
Yeah, I think it's easy as a scientist to be like, well, obviously you should have the one that is, the most genetically suitable, which I think a lot of people do. But then we're taking out the emotion about it, the, years of trying, the toll of all of this process takes on someone physically and emotionally. So it is very difficult.
And what I find weird about how eggs as a whole have developed, I guess, is that the nucleus doesn't contain any of the genetic information that relates to these important mitochondrial cells, as far as I can tell anyway. And to me, that just seems almost like a little bit of a design flaw. If they're so important, why only have it from one parent?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I think there's a thing as well that are we XX? Are women XX? Is that the thing? And men are XY?
I can't remember. It's another school level science fact, and I haven't been to school in decades.
That is true. I think women are XX, and I think that because of that, because we then have multiple copies, we're less likely to get certain genetic disorders because we've got like backups essentially, which I think is quite fun. But then it sucks if you're a man because you don't have that extra part.
And there's something about mitochondria evolved from bacteria or something like that.
Mitochondria are so weird. It's like they're on their own separate thing. I think there was an idea that mitochondria were once like a living entity, like a bacteria that got swallowed up, but that is again going back way further.
Yes, long time ago, I imagine. But does make an interesting point that at least part of our genetic material is derived from germs, essentially.
Yeah, which is why they have their own thing, because they were once separate entities to being inside a human being. So they would have had their own DNA as a living organism. And then they got absorbed by evolution, I guess, but they retain their own genetic information, which is so cool.
Something else that interests me is that there does seem to be some sort of interaction between the mitochondria and the nucleus. So the mitochondria sitting in the cytoplasm is just doing its own thing regardless of what the nucleus does. The nucleus can control what the mitochondria are doing and sort of help determine the development of this individual oocyte, I think it's called, when it's just one cell.
I mean, yeah, that makes sense, right? The nucleus is the brain of the cell. So it's sending messages all the time to different parts of the cell to do stuff. Which is cool when you think in the 3 donor example that then is completely different nucleus and mitochondria from different people, and it still works.
Exactly, yeah. You would think there must be some way of trying to define, like, when people do organ donation, you see this on TV programs all the time where your body rejects the organ.
Yeah. You'd think that the mitochondria would be like, well, that's not the nucleus we were talking to yesterday. Why do we take orders from this one now?
Yeah, this one's sending different chemicals. I don't get it. I guess because it's just chemistry though, right? It's not actually sitting there thinking, what's going on? It just responds to the chemicals it's given.
Yeah, I suppose so. Maybe we're anthropomorphizing it too much. In my head, that seems like, why wouldn't the mitochondria reject the new nucleus? But then I guess maybe it's similar enough that it's doing enough of the same things.
Yeah, it's just chemistry. Chemicals don't necessarily care about what's going on.
I've given them too much credit.
Yeah, weird segue going from ethics to chemistry in a few minutes, but hey.
This always happens when it's me and you, Laura. We like to bounce around.
I wonder if that makes it challenging for people to keep up with what we're saying.
Yeah, if it is challenging, please let us know, because we'll try and be more linear in the future. But if you like our semi-chaotic style, then also let us know that.
Yeah, definitely.
And we can keep doing this how we do it now.
So we've already discussed briefly that there's a Netflix film that sort of documents the first success of IVF back in 78, wasn't it? The first IVF baby was born.
Yeah, 78, which is quite late. But then I remember that we're now 2025, so it's actually
a long time ago.
A fair while ago, yeah.
Yeah, but I think the research started in 68, which is roughly the time that the pill was made available to women who were married. So they had a bit more control about their own ability to conceive. So at least in the UK, the 60s were a big thing for women's rights, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess so. This is like taking back control of your reproductive health.
Yeah.
But I think the film is really good. It's pretty heartwarming. but then also being like sad at the same time.
I quite liked the way it tracked the highs and lows of the research and brought across the scientists' disappointment and frustration at things when they weren't working. There was a bit where they were trying to figure out why one of them couldn't conceive, and they traced it back to some chemicals that had become toxic and had to throw everything out and start again, and they were really angry about this.
Yes, I remember that. She like has a light bulb moment, and then they have to get rid of it all and start all over again.
And it seemed to capture quite well some of the main improvements, like harvesting the eggs laparoscopically, so using a tiny torch essentially and tiny tools to make a small incision rather than just opening up your belly and fishing some stuff out.
Yeah, I mean that must be like an egg retrieval is it considered major surgery? I'm not sure, but at the time it would have been if they definitely were putting people under and opening up them to get the eggs out.
It briefly mentioned, I said the growth medium needed some work. It briefly mentioned it, but it just said it was the wrong pH, essentially. And it sounds like there's a bit more to it than that. So I found a research paper or a peer-reviewed journal article that kind of summarised some of the advancements. And they do things like add different growth factors and different amino acids to this substrate they put the cells in.
Yeah.
And different labs used to produce their own, which makes sense when you're doing the research. But now it's standard and you can just buy it commercially.
What, as in I could buy oocyte growth medium?
Potentially, if you go into a medical supplies company, they might ask why you'd want it as an individual.
Yeah, probably. If I'm doing illicit experiments in my back garden. But no, I don't know, should it be standardised? Or should we be pushing people to develop different ones for different reasons as like a sort of healthy scientific growth?
I wouldn't be surprised if it's a bit of both, that maybe there are different ones for slightly different purposes. Like, 'cause there must be different reasons why you can't conceive, and some of it might be, I think I've heard the phrase, you have a hostile womb before.
Oh, yeah. That just seems rude, frankly.
This is true. So does the term geriatric pregnancy. But hey, it's a medical term apparently.
Yeah, they could be kinder.
They could. Being over 35 doesn't mean you're geriatric, does it?
No, exactly. Maybe we should just scrap the term geriatric altogether. I feel like it's not... even if you're 85, I don't think it's kind to call anyone geriatric.
No. There was also something they picked up on in the Netflix film. They'd started off trying to force the mother's hormone cycle by effectively giving them different hormones to try and help them conceive, which didn't seem to be working. So they switched to going with the natural hormone cycle, which again, I guess, depending on the type of infertility you have, that wouldn't be possible.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the standard sort of thing is now, but to my understanding, they try and pump you full of hormones to the point where you're would have sort of ovulated maybe, or your lining would be thick enough to then support a pregnancy, and then they put the embryo in. The timing of it is very important in modern IVF, as well as what they were trying to do in the movie.
Yeah, and apparently that's how the first IVF baby in the United States was conceived. They injected with human menopausal gonadotropin, so hormones for your reproductive organs. But apparently it breaks down quite quickly, so you have to have injections quite often.
I think that is a big thing of IVF in general, is a lot of injections and pills and hormones that you have to take to... you have to stimulate your ovaries to produce eggs in the first place, to do an egg collection, and then you have to do another round to prepare your uterus for the embryo transfer. But it's funny what you said about American, because the first US baby was significantly later than the first baby born from IVF, which was in British soil. Just making that point. Louise Brown, 1978, world's first IVF baby.
And the embryologist, Jean Purdy, seemed to be instrumental in making this happen, as the Netflix film shows us. And it starts off with a voiceover of one of the characters saying it wouldn't have happened without her. She drove it forward, and she talked to the women and put them at ease as well, so she could do both. I'm a scientist, I do the science, and I'm going to talk to you like you're a human being, which is quite nice.
Yeah, I'm also a nice person and I care about you rather than you're a statistic in my experiment that I'm running.
And I'm slightly disappointed. Was this one prizes? Didn't they win a Nobel Prize that went to the two men who were involved in the research and didn't go to Jean?
Oh, what a classic.
I know. Again, it was the 70s. Times have changed.
It's giving Watson and Crick all over again. That's how I feel about that.
Yeah, from discovering the structure of DNA, which wouldn't have happened without Rosalind Franklin. Yeah.
Aye.
Yeah. However, one of those doctors did develop the laparoscopic technique for harvesting eggs, which was a big innovation. So it couldn't have happened without any one of them, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, they were a team, right? The three of them were all working together to achieve the same thing. So, yeah, we should credit Jean, but fair dues to the other two as well.
There's something else that I find slightly phenomenal about this as well, is that because you can have donor eggs as well as donor sperm if you want, you can give birth without having ovaries.
Yeah, it's incredible.
To me, that just sounds like science fiction, essentially. But it's not, it's science fact.
Well, it's often with like same-sex couples, they do what's called reciprocal IVF, so that one partner will have the egg from the other partner inside them. So they like feel like they're more part of the, I don't know, journey of the pregnancy, the experience, which I think is quite interesting. Obviously, if they were a female couple, they still have to get a sperm donor. But then you're taking genetics from one partner, putting it in the other partner with a sperm donor, and then coming out with a healthy baby, which I think is quite cool.
And again, it makes me wonder, going back to your point about why don't the mitochondria in the 3-body fertilisation sit there thinking, I don't know this nucleus, I don't like these chemicals. How come the mother's body doesn't think, I don't recognise that egg?
Yeah, it's wild, isn't it? How that could possibly be a thing. And also, like I was saying before, with some people create, 8 embryos and only use 3 of them, there's also like complete embryo donation. So you could donate your embryo to a couple that can't produce eggs or whatever, and then your body's never seen any part of that, and yet it still can lead to pregnancy and childbirth, which is just mind-blowing.
Yeah, that's such a great thing to do.
Yeah. I'm sure lots of people will be incredibly grateful with, embryo donation. But then obviously there's like the ethical considerations of the fact that you have willingly, like your genetic offspring are walking around calling another couple their parents. But if you've done that, then, I guess you're fine with it. Or you like recognise that that's going to happen.
Yeah, and then what if your children and their children meet and sparks fly? So at some point they have to find out, right, that they're basically just incestuous.
It is like theoretically possible that you could meet your brother and not know, or your sister, if your parents never told you that they'd done this.
Yeah, I guess that's where some of the ethics about this kick in. Does that child have a right to know who his parents are and what other siblings are out there?
And there's also that hugely controversial story, I think it was Australia, where loads of couples went to the same Australian IVF clinic, and it turned out the doctor was using his sperm the whole time and had like over 100 children born, all with different parents, but they were all like genetically related to him. That was absolutely wild.
Yeah, I've heard of a few instances of this, and it did raise the question, well, what's that doing to the gene pool if it's decreasing genetic diversity? How many men would have to do this for it to be a definite problem? Because without genetic diversity, you end up with lots of what are usually recessive traits coming through, which then leads to all sorts of diseases that you wouldn't normally get, because if you've got recessive genes from one parent and dominant genes from another parent, the dominant genes win out.
Yeah. But I guess, now probably the gene pool is big enough that it would be okay. But then if all those children stayed in that area and met people from the same age or, a few years either way, then I guess they could be very closely genetically related.
So with all this talk of genetics, and some of the research does do genetic testing to decide which groups of cells that have started off from those eggs, I should say, are most likely to be successful when they're implanted. So there's obviously an element of genetic testing, and it makes me think about designer babies, and is that a concern here, and how far do you take the genetic testing?
Oh, without this 3 donor method and without genetic testing, we wouldn't have healthy children without this life-limiting mitochondrial disease. I think they were saying that the people that have this disease have like developmental delays, might require wheelchairs, die young, are not thriving necessarily. However, other diseases, you could wipe out certain things. Like, now they test already embryos in children for Down syndrome. And you might, as a pregnant person, get the, diagnosis of Down syndrome and have the option to continue the pregnancy or not because of that. And then it goes a step further when you're actively looking for, like, a genetic embryo with blue eyes or blonde hair or, going to be 6 feet tall. I don't know what sort of thing they can tell with designer babies.
I know. I feel like there should be a limit on deciding what a person looks like, because that seems totally unnecessary to me.
And also everyone looks completely different, right? Like, we're not all aiming to look like one person. Well, I hope we're not. Or
No.
the parents who are considering designer babies are trying this, I don't know.
No, the world would be really boring if everyone looked the same. There have been creepy sci-fi movies about this.
It seems very bad. But then could we introduce like more fun stuff?
Oh, are you thinking about our animal traits episode where you wanted, did you want a tail?
I wanted a tail. But then I don't know if you could do that because genetically we don't have... Maybe we do have the code for a tail.
I mean, we used to have tails, allegedly. So at what point does it become unhelpful genetic material?
Yeah, can we turn it back on? Switch on all those, what do they call it, like dead spots of DNA that are just like filler code that aren't activated?
There's junk DNA.
Junk DNA, that's it. Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. I mean, probably having a tail is not everything I've made it out to be, but it would be quite fun.
You've got to wonder what the experiments look like for that as well.
Yeah.
Like, you have to find the right genetic material and find the right place to insert it, presumably.
I don't want a tail coming out of my elbow, do I? That would just be rubbish.
And that.
Oh, I think for eradication of disease, it's pretty incredible that you could, like, especially with these really severe sort of life-limiting, horrible diseases. But then it does get murky.
Because there are spectra, aren't they? Like you mentioned Downs, and as far as I'm aware, there are different levels of having Down syndrome, and some people cope really well and get on with life. And that's part of having diversity in society.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, I don't know, something like deafness. Again, lots of people are very proud of their deaf culture and sign language and everything like that. And yet, if you could produce a healthy baby that you knew wouldn't have a hearing loss versus would have a hearing loss, that is such a quagmire of different ethical considerations.
And I suppose it depends on how much you're willing to adapt to accommodate that difference, because so few people need help with hearing. Like, I wouldn't know what to do.
Yeah.
You'd have to commit to learning sign language and accepting that your child won't be able to respond to threats like alarms going off. A threat if there's like an imminent, like if there's a fire, I should say, not just your clock going off is not an alarm that's an imminent threat.
No, I know what you mean though, like a fire or like, you know, not hearing a car come speeding around the corner and
Yes.
then that sort of danger, rather than not being at work at exactly 9 p.m.
Yeah. It's just something to get used to, isn't it? I suppose it depends on the individual whether they're willing to adapt. But I still think that that sort of diversity in society is helpful because it helps you understand how to work differently with different people.
Yeah, and think of the technology, like cochlear implants wouldn't exist if there weren't deaf children and adults. People wouldn't have been looking into how to help people. And like things like, screen readers for the blind and things like that, all this technology that we've created to make the world more accessible wouldn't have been developed.
Yeah. And it's not just, going back to the IVF as a general thing, it's not just humans that this is helping to save or giving them the joy of having children. It's being done with rhinos to save the species as well.
Yeah, this is something I'm a little bit obsessed with, I'll be honest. I did have the opportunity to speak to one of the lead researchers and members of the team that is actually carrying this out, which is just incredible. There's only 2 northern white rhinos left in the world, and they're both female, and neither of them are healthy enough to carry a pregnancy. So what they're doing is taking eggs from them while they're still alive and then basically doing rhino IVF, and they've got sperm from a now deceased male rhino. So then they're making embryos, and what they plan to do and what they have done, I think, but without live birth success, is place the embryos inside a southern white rhino, and then that would be like effectively the surrogate, and then they could get a new northern white rhino on the ground, which would be absolutely incredible.
I'd quite like to know how they're doing the harvesting of the eggs, because these are big creatures.
Yeah.
So it's not like performing laparoscopy on a human being with our relatively tiny stomachs.
I believe Susanna said that they do it maybe once a month or maybe every other month. I can't remember, but if anyone wants to listen to the podcast episode that I did with Susanna, you're more than welcome. She was incredible. But yeah, they literally do egg harvesting on these rhinos, which is so cool.
Wow. And I guess working with their hormone cycles and then getting it back in there is also not necessarily straightforward as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, like a person can tell you, yes, you can do an ultrasound on me, or yes, you can inject me with this. A rhino can't say yes or no, or I consent. But at the same time, if we don't do this, then northern white rhinos will die out very soon.
Yeah, and fewer animal species in the world is not what we want, because going back to my point about diversity in society, you also want diversity in nature to keep it resilient.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did this. We're the reason that we are doing IVF on northern white rhinos is because we basically wiped them all out. So
we as a species, human beings.
Yes. Yeah, not me and you. Yeah. But I do have an interesting fact for you, which I think you'll enjoy. More than 13 million babies, and this is human babies, not other species, have been born via IVF since 1978.
Wow. I feel like that's a lot, but then my immediate question is, what's that as a fraction of the world population?
Of the world population? What's the world population? It's like 8 billion, isn't it?
So small in that respect, but still an awful lot of successful scientific endeavours.
Yeah, I was going to work it out per year. That's what I thought you were going to ask me. It's been 47 years, 13 million over 47. I can't do that mental maths, but someone can work it out and tell us.
And I see your statistic on how many people have been born, and I raise you the oldest experiments for IVF date from the 1800s.
Wow.
So it's not necessarily new science. It's well over 100 years old. Well over.
That is impressive that people in the 1800s were like caring about this and trying to do something about it.
And again, it was tests with animals, not necessarily to save a species, just because it probably would have been wrong and weird to do it on humans.
Yeah, I mean, you see in the movie that there's still a lot of protests and people are like, you're playing God and you're taking things that you shouldn't be messing about with. But obviously, if they hadn't done it, we wouldn't have 13 million children. So clearly, it was a pretty incredible breakthrough.
And I think all of this is a good thing overall. It's helping people to do something that they really want, that they can't do otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. It's remarkable. I mean, the fact that we can, A, help people that want a child have a child who can't have one naturally, great. B, the fact that we can now take out horrible life-limiting diseases from this equation and help people have healthy children that wouldn't have otherwise had healthy children, also great. I mean, another 50 years of IVF research, who knows where we'll be.
Yeah, and we're also helping to save species that we're making go extinct.
So, a win all round.
Many positives, yeah.
A triple threat of excitement. It is fun that you can apply it to other species. You'd think they started it in mice. Maybe they did start it in mice. Usually everything starts in mice. But the fact that we've got IVF that we can now do it on rhinos, and presumably other stuff, is just cool.
Yeah, it was hamsters were mentioned in the Netflix film, weren't they? Which I thought was, because I used to have pet hamsters, was quite amusing.
Yeah, normally it's always mice getting the credit for this and that, but why not hamsters?
Maybe there was a scientific reason. Maybe we should do some digging and try and find out why they were amenable to doing IVF research.
On hamsters?
There could be some genetic reason why hamsters are not mice.
Yeah, there might be. Maybe they've just got bigger, like they're slightly bigger, aren't they? Probably. Maybe it's just a bit easier to get tiny cells from a slightly bigger creature.
And then I guess rats just weren't suitable either because they're bigger again.
Maybe they're too big. Maybe hamsters is like the Goldilocks porridge of the of the medical research animal.
Which I could definitely not do because they're just cute to me and I'd want to take them home. And that's not what happens in science at all.
Unfortunately not.
But on that note, I think that's a good place to leave it before I get really maudlin again.
Yeah, I was trying to bring it up. The Goldilocks porridge of animal research. And Laura's like, and then they all die.
Yeah, and I turned it down again, I know. So we've talked about recent news that involves having 3 parents to create babies that don't have a very serious disease. And the press is maybe slightly inflating some of the claims to make it seem more exciting. So 8 babies have been born by this method currently to different parents for the most part. We've also talked about the history of in-vitro fertilisation in general and looked at how it's being used now to save species from extinction. So if you enjoyed this episode, thanks for listening and we'll see you next time.
Bye!
The views expressed in this podcast belong entirely to the person that said them. They do not represent any industry or organisation. If you enjoyed listening to these views, it would really help us out if you could rate us, leave a review and tell a friend. This podcast was sponsored by no one, but if you're interested in funding us to continue to have frank discussions about science and engineering, please get in touch.